Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryankaravavahe Tejasvinavadhetamastu Ma Vidvishavahe Om Shanti 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 Paratatve Sadadino Ramakrishna Samakyaya Lodharmasthapanarato Viresham Tam Namamyaham. In the webinar series we have arranged in commemoration of International Day of Yoga, which falls on 21st of June 2022, on Swami Vivekananda's 4 yogas and their synthesis, which is unique contribution. We have a talk by one of our research scholars researching for the PhD degree in the Department of Sanskrit and Philosophy, Ms. Suvarna Pal, and she will be speaking on Swami Vivekananda's Karma Yoga vis-à-vis Western philosophical thought. Swami Vivekananda's Karma Yoga is very unique in the sense that Swami Vivekananda says Karma Yogi, even without belief in God, even about faith and religion, can perform action with the idea of work for work's sake. This has a deep resemblance to Immanuel Kant's duty for duty's sake and the critical approach of Kant taken by Bradley later on, and Swarna Pal is focusing on Swami Vivekananda's approach to Karma Yoga, comparing and contrasting it with the approach of Immanuel Kant and Bradley. To our knowledge, this is perhaps the first time that this kind of study of Kant, Bradley, vis-à-vis Swami Vivekananda's Karma Yoga has been attempted. Now we have a talk by Ms. Suvarna Pal on Swami Vivekananda's Karma Yoga vis-à-vis Western philosophical thought, particularly by Kant and Bradley.
Namashri Yatirajaya Vivekananda Suraye Satchit Sukha Swarupaya Swamine Tapahari. This paper is entitled Swami Vivekananda's Karma Yoga vis-à-vis Western philosophical thought. Vedanta, the ancient spiritual science of India, is the treasure house of the spiritual truths discovered by the rishis, the spiritual scientists who systematically investigated into the inner world of higher consciousness and documented the discoveries of their exploration, which now known as the Upanishads. The crux of the Upanishadic teaching, as emphasized by Swami Vivekananda, hereafter we will refer to as Swamiji in modern times, is the potential divinity of all beings. Swamiji's famous statement is worth recalling in this context. Each soul is potentially divine. The goal is to manifest the divinity by controlling nature, external and internal. Do this either by work or worship or psychic control or philosophy, by one or more or all of these, and be free. This is the whole of religion. Doctrines or dogmas or rituals or books or temples or forms are but secondary details. Shvetashvetara Upanishad declares that we are all the children of immortality, or Amritasya Putraha. If this were so, why is it that we are now in such a miserable state? Our ancient scriptures remind us that we are miserable because we have forgotten our real nature. Why so? Owing to ignorance called avidya or ajnana. The knowledge of our real nature as the Atman or potential divinity is covered with ignorance, and so we are deluded into imagining that we are miserable. The Bhagavad Gita says, Ajnane navritam jnanam tena mushyanti jantavaha. Swami Vivekananda suggests 4 main paths to manifest the divinity within, to realize our real nature as the Atman. Each of these four paths is called yoga: work, worship, psychic control, philosophy, respectively, are the paths of Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Raja Yoga, and Jnana Yoga. These various paths are capable of leading the eager aspirant to the ultimate goal of freedom, but are chosen by different aspirants according to their diverse temperaments. Swami Vivekananda asserts this truth quoting from a verse from the Shiva Mahimna Stotra in his paper on Hinduism that he presented at the famous World Parliament of Religions at Chicago in 1893. As the different streams having their sources in different places all mingle their water in the sea, so, O Lord, the different paths which men take through different tendencies, various though they appear, crooked or straight, all lead to Thee. Of the four different yogas, Karma Yoga, according to Swamiji, is purifying the mind by means of work. The Bhagavad Gita described the path of Karma Yoga in great detail, laying down extensive prescriptions on how actions are to be performed with detachment, without the feeling of the sense of agency, and without expectation of the fruits of one's action. Swamiji specifically mentions that our karma determines what we deserve and what we can assimilate. Swamiji speaks of work for work's sake. He also asserts that one who works in this way does not care for name or fame or even to go to heaven, simply working for the sake of the work, working without any selfish motive whatsoever, because good will come of it. It is hard to do it, but in the heart of hearts, we know its value and the good it brings. It is the greatest manifestation of power, this tremendous restraint. Self restraint is a manifestation of greater power than all outgoing action. Swamiji's assertion of the secret of Karma Yoga as work for work's sake remind us of the Western philosopher Immanuel Kant and his deontological theory of duty for duty's sake. The paper attempts to discuss at length Swamiji's teaching on Karma Yoga as work for work's sake, as well as his concept on duty vis-à-vis Kant's theory of duty for duty's sake. Kant considers that no consequence can have fundamental moral worth. The only thing that is goodwill. The goodwill freely chooses to do its moral duty. That duty, in turn, is dictated solely by reason. Discussion on Kant's deontological theory vis-à-vis Swami Vivekananda's idea on duty leads us to the British philosopher Francis Herbert Bradley's concept of duty as expounded in his famous essay My Station and Its Duties in the book Ethical Studies. Bradley states that it is man's position in the society that makes for his duty in this mortal state. He criticizes Kant in the chapter Duty for Duty's Sake of the book for having his idea of duty not dealing with the real life situation. Bradley makes a very powerful statement in the concluding remarks of his ethical studies that if it is a religious duty to be religious, then it is also a moral duty to be religious. Precisely as if it is a moral duty to be moral, it is also a religious duty to be moral. He further asserts that the sphere of morality is the sphere of practice, and the sphere of practice is the sphere of morality. There is no escaping this conclusion, and then, so far as religion is practical, the worlds of morality and religion must coincide. In regard to religion, Bradley states, it is the belief with the heart that is wanted, and where that is not, religion is not. Else even the very devils would be religious. This takes us back to Swamiji's words spoken from the core of his heart that our duty is to encourage everyone in his struggle to live up to his ideal. and at the same time to make the ideal as near as possible to the truth. Swamiji considers that to be our duty which takes us Godward, quite akin to the idea of Bradley that morality and religion are consummated in God. A conclusion from the discussion on duty by Kant and Bradley vis-à-vis Swami Vivekananda will in the end help us to understand that duty becomes meaningful only with reference to an ideal. Otherwise, it becomes a dry physical exercise which does not effectively help in the removal of bondage. The secret of karma. Swamiji asserts that Karma Yoga is a system of ethics and religion intended to attain freedom through unselfishness and by good works. Swamiji specifically mentions that a Karma Yogi may not believe in God or think of any metaphysical speculation, but he would have his own special aim, which is the realization of unselfishness, and he has to work that out himself. Thus, according to Swamiji, unselfishness holds a special position in the life of Karma Yogi. The crux of the matter is that, contrary to popular notion, it is not karma which is the cause of bondage, but the cause of bondage is rooted in the way, in the attitude which an action is performed. This makes for the differentiation of karma into two types: sakama karma or actions done with desire for the fruits of the action, and nishkama karma or action performed without desire for the fruits of the action. Action done with desire for the fruits of the action or sakama karma is what binds human beings and in the cause of bondage. But this is not the case with nishkama karma, as here the performer of the action does not hanker after the fruits of the action. To the onlooker, it appears to be same action, but depending upon the motive, the attitude of the performer, the work becomes the cause of bondage or freedom, according as it is performed without or with the desire for the fruits of action. So we can say that karma per se is not the cause of bondage, but it is attachment to and desire for the fruits of the work that binds the human soul. Therefore, Swamiji clearly states that misery comes through attachment, not through work. In the Bhagavad Gita, the Lord says that desire, which is the insatiable fire, covers knowledge. Similar is the idea in the Amrita Bindu Upanishad, which goes as mind alone is the cause of man's bondage and liberation. Mana eva manushyanam karanam bandha moksha. Man desires an object because he wants to satisfy his little self through that object. Swamiji explains in the Jnana Yoga how the search of the idea of individuality in the body, sense, or even memory is a very narrow idea of individuality. Swamiji mentions further that we are struggling towards individuality and that is the real nature of man. To quote his words, he alone lives whose life is in the whole universe, and the more we concentrate our lives on limited things, the faster we go towards death. The intention of bringing here the context of Jnana Yoga is because Swamiji himself mentions that the explanation and the rationale of this unselfish work is only in Jnana Yoga. Swamiji asserts that it is natural divinity of man that makes one love all, sacrificing his little self simply for the good of others. Swamiji reminds us how man thinks foolishly that he can make himself happy, and after years of struggle, he finds out at last that true happiness consists in killing selfishness, and no one can make him happy except himself. Hence, the highest ideal Swamiji mentions is eternal and entire self abnegation, where there is no I but all is thou, and where he is conscious or unconscious, of it, Karma Yoga leads man to that end. Sri Ramakrishna's pithy assertion is worth recalling in this context. All troubles and botheration come to an end when the I dies. We have to work incessantly, and there is no escape from it. What is needed then is to change our attitude, our strategy, as it were, which Sri Krishna calls kaushala or skill, towards our work. To transform all work from being the cause of bondage to the cause of liberation is the kaushala or strategy. Lord Krishna says, Buddhi yukta jahatiha ubhe sukrita duskrite tasmat yogaya yujyasva yoga karmasu kaushalam. Possessed of wisdom, one rejects here both virtue and vice. Therefore, devote yourself to karma yoga. Yoga is skillfulness in action. Sakama karma is the cause of attachment, which produces samskara. As regards samskara, Swamiji says, every work that we do, every movement of the body, every thought that we think leaves us such an impression on the mind staff, and even when such impressions are not obvious to the surface, they are sufficiently strong to work beneath the surface subconsciously. These impressions are called samskara, which have the possibility of reappearing. Man's character is determined by the samskara. Nishkama karma does not produce impressions because it is done without attachment, just as the burnt seed does not generate a plant. We have to keep in mind that each samskara, whether good or bad, are but obstacles to liberation. Swamiji says that the bad tendencies are to be counteracted by good thoughts and good deeds, and when they totally disappear, then the good tendencies have also to be conquered. One will then be able to go beyond all contradicts what is technically called pairs of opposites. In the words of Gita, he comes dvandva beyond the pairs of opposites. Sri Krishna exhorts Arjuna to attain this state. He said, Traigunya Vishaya Veda Nistraigunyo Bhavarjuna Nirdvandho Nityasatvastho Niryoga Kshema Atmavan. O Arjuna, the Vedas have the three qualities as their object. You become free from worldliness, free from the pairs of duality, ever poised in the quality of sattva, without acquisition and protection and self-collected. Swamiji says, when you have acquired the feeling of non-attachment, there will be neither good nor evil for you. It is only selfishness that causes the difference between good and evil. Lord Krishna says in the Gita, Tasmad asakta satatam karyam karma samachara asakto hyacharan karma paramapnoti purusha. Therefore, remaining unattached, always perform the obligatory duty. For by performing duty without attachment, a person attains the highest. He also says, Asakta buddhi sarvatra chitatma vigatas priyaha naishkarmya siddhim paramam sannyase nadhikachyati. He whose intellect remains unattached to everyone, who has conquered his internal organs and is desireless, attains through monasticism the supreme perfection consisting in the state of one free from duties. The Lord makes us aware of the fact that we have the right only to work and not to the consequences of the action. Karmanye vadhikaraste ma phaleshu kadachana. Your right is for action alone, never for the results. The question now arises, if there is no desire at all, what is the motivation for work at all? What is the motive force that inspires one to action? Swamiji advises Karma Yogi to work for work's sake. When a man works with this idea, he gets two kinds of benefit. One is earthly and other is spiritual. Even from the earthly point of view, motiveless action enables us to accomplish more work steadily and surely, maximizing the results. Swamiji puts this beautifully. He said, less passion there is, the better we work. The calmer we are, the better for us. and the more amount of work we can do. When we let loose our feelings, we waste so much energy, shatter our nerves, disturb our minds, and accomplish very little work. What is the spiritual benefit? Freedom or liberation, as has been elaborately discussed. Does the Karma Yogi work out of any obligation or compulsion or duty, or it is the spontaneous expression of the Karma Yogi's one-pointed devotion to the ideal of Karma Yoga? We take up this question in the next section and discuss the concept of duty according to Kant vis-à-vis Swami Vivekananda. The concept of duty according to Immanuel Kant and Swami Vivekananda. Swamiji says, any action that makes us go Godward is good action and is our duty. The German philosopher Immanuel Kant's idea of duty is famously known as duty for duty's sake. Kant formulated a moral principle which, according to him, the supreme law of morality. According to Kant, when an unconditional value is attributed to any action, it is because of the motive from which the action is performed. Therefore, what gives a morally good action its special value is the motivation behind it, the principle of the basis of which it is chosen, or in Kantian terms, willed. Hence, for Kant, the moral worth of a human action does not depend on the external consequences, but depends on the motive from which the action is done. Kant says that he shall inspect the concept of duty and says that duty is the goodwill operating under certain subjective hindrances, which, however, far from concealing it, make it shine forth all the more brightly. Kant says it is impossible to think of anything at all in the world, or indeed even beyond it, that could be taken to be good without limitation, except a goodwill. What exactly is the goodwill? Kant explains. A goodwill is good not because of what it effects or accomplishes, nor because of its fitness to attain some intended end, but good just by its willing, that is, in itself and considered by itself. Regarding goodwill, Kant further asserts that usefulness or fruitlessness can neither add anything to this work nor take anything away from it. This helps us understand that goodwill is the only thing to which one can attribute unconditional worth because it is good just by its willing. Kant mentions that a good will is a will whose decisions are wholly determined by moral demands, or that which he refers to as the moral law. Humans unavoidably feel that law as a constraint on the natural desire, which is the reason why such laws are applied to the humans, are imperatives and duties. Imperative means command. It tells us what we should do or ought to do. Kant says that moral law is categorical imperative. Imperative may be hypothetical or categorical. A hypothetical imperative is conditional. It says, for example, if you want to achieve good marks in examination, then you ought to study well. Hypothetical imperative refers to some particular end. On the contrary, categorical imperative does not refer to any end. It is unconditional. Kant explains categorical imperative with the example of breaking a promise. Breaking a promise can never be universalized because if it were a universal law, then there would be no meaning to make a promise. The reason that it cannot be universalized makes it unethical for Kant, and hence it must not be performed. It is to be borne in mind that for Kant, a free will and a will under moral law are one and the same. The question now arises as to where from does moral law originate in humans? It is to be noted in this context that Kant distinguishes between pure reason and practical reason. Pure reason is the reasoning which is pure of everything derived from experience. Then the question arises, if whatever we know of this universe is derived from experience, then what can be the concern of pure reason? It is true that what we know of the world is through experience, but the framework of the knowledge, the systematic construction of knowledge itself, we cannot know from such experiences. To know anything about the universe requires that experiences be meaningful to us. Yet, the meaningfulness of any experience must be determined by some standard other than the experience itself. The standard or framework is a condition for all empirical knowledge, and thus it cannot itself be known by experience, since experience already presupposes this framework. If the framework can be known at all, it must be known quite independently of all experience, that is, by some activity of reason which does not rely on experience of any kind, which is pure reason. For Kant, moral law is known intuitively. Kant regards conscience as practical reason which imposes moral law upon itself. Moral law is a priori or prior to experience and not empirical. The maxims of morality are deduced from moral law. They are also self-evident. The rightness or wrongness of a particular action is inferred from its arrangement or agreement or disagreement with the moral law. Hence, it becomes clear that Kant did not favor teleological morality but accepted deontological morality. He emphasized not the result but how to perform a duty. Kant says an action from duty has its moral worth not in the purpose that it to be attained by it, but in the maxim according to which it is resolved upon, and thus it does not depend on the actuality of the object of the action, but merely on the principle of willing according to which, regardless of any object of the desiderative faculty, the action is done. Regarding duties, Swamiji says, if I have to do something, I must know what is my duty and then I can do it. He further asserts that the term duty, like every other abstract term, is impossible to define. I can only get an idea of it by knowing its practical operation and results. Swamiji also says that the ordinary idea of duty everywhere is that every good man follows the dictates of his conscience. Swamiji considers through it is impossible to give an objective definition of duty, yet there is duty from the subjective side. Swamiji says, from the subjective standpoint, we may see that certain acts have a tendency to exalt and ennoble us, while certain other acts have a tendency to degrade and brutalize us. There is, however, only one idea of duty which has been universally accepted by all mankind of all ages and sects and countries, and that has been summed up in the Sanskrit aphorism thus: do not injure any being. Not injuring any being is virtue, injuring any being is sin. Swamiji makes us aware that we should always try to see the duty of others through their own eyes and never judge the customs of their peoples by our standard. He asserts, I am not the standard of the universe. I have to accommodate myself to the world, and not the world to me. Therefore, it is quite natural that duty may vary from person to person according to the position of life and society. Swamiji says that nature of our duties change with the changing environment, and what is significant in the assertion is that doing the duty which is ours at a particular time is the best thing we can do in this world. The next important assertion Swamiji makes is that no man is to be judged by the mere nature of the duties, but all should be judged by the manner and the spirit in which they perform them. Swamiji urges to pay more attention to the means of work than end, which he considered as a secret of success, which he says he learned from a great sage, Pauhari Baba. Swamiji says, the world is not for cowards. Do not try to fly. Look not for success or failure. Join yourself to the perfectly unselfish will and work on. The idea in Swamiji statements is akin to Kantian idea that it is motive of an action that ultimately counts and not the result that is generated by it. Kant also speaks in favor of the will which is not directed towards any selfish gain. We have discussed earlier how Kant distinguishes between autonomy and heteronomy of will. A will that is guided by selfish motive cannot be autonomous, and there is desire for some end, and that, according to Kant, cannot be a moral law. Swamiji also talks of unselfish will, which may be understood as the will not directed by inclinations. We may consider that the inclinational actions are nothing but the actions which are based on pravritti. What is pravritti? Swamiji says pravritti means revolving towards. The revolving towards is that the world, the I and mine. It includes all those things which are always enriching that me by wealth and money and power and name and fame, and which are of grasping nature, always tending to accumulate everything in one center, the center being myself. Nivritti, which means revolving away, is opposite to pravritti, and Swamiji considered nivritti as the basis of all morality. And he also said that when man would reach the state of nivritti, he can attain perfection of karma yoga. This helps us understand that nivritti, which has its roots in the selfless will, can be thought akin to the idea of goodwill according to Kant. Swamiji points out that the karma yogi asks why you require any motive to work other than the inborn love of freedom. Be beyond the common worldly motives. To work you have the right, but not the fruits thereof. When the idea of doing good becomes a part of his very being, then he will not seek for any motive outside. Let us do good because it is good to do good. He who does he who does good work even in the order to get the heaven binds himself down, says the Karma Yogi. Unselfishness is more paying. Only people do not have the patience to practice it. It is not only for Karma Yoga. Renunciation is the watchword of every other yogas. As soon as the little I is eliminated, the Karma Yogi can get a taste of universal love. Then alone will he be ready every moment to sacrifice his life for others' sake. In the Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna says, Yada samharate chayam kurmunga niva sarvashaha indriyani indriyarthebhyas tasya prajna pratisthita. And when this one fully withdrawn the senses from the object of senses as a tortoise, wholly the limbs, then his wisdom remains established. But are all inclinations are to be totally extirpated? Kant himself says moderation in effects and passions, self-control and sober deliberation are not only good in many respects, they even appear to constitute part of the inner worth of a person, but they are far from deserving to be declared good without limitation. However, unconditionally they are praised by the ancients. For without principles of the goodwill, they can become most evil, and the cold blood of a scoundrel makes him not only for more dangerous, but also immediately more loathsome in our eyes than he would have been taken to be without it. Moral action, according to Swamiji, is selfless work, and that is only path to realization, which has its roots in renunciation of the little self. Swamiji says each wave in the chitta that says I and mine immediately puts a chain round us and makes us slaves. And the same and the more we say I and mine, the more slavery grows, the more misery increases. So Karma Yogi, according to Swamiji, must be moral to attain his goal. A karma yogi, according to Swamiji, has to first destroy the tendency to project this tentacle of selfishness. Only then can a karma yogi go out in this world and work as much as he can. He compares this state of mind with the lotus leaf, which, though in water, is not touched by it or get attached to it. This is the state of dispassion or non-attachment, when the narrow idea of self has been eliminated, thrown overboard. The watchword of the Karma Yogi is not I but thou, and no amount of self-sacrifice is too much for him. The universe will go on always. Our goal is freedom, our goal is unselfishness, and according to Karma Yoga, that goal is to be reached through work. Kant considered goodwill as the only good, and Swamiji asserts that unselfishness alone is good. We must keep in mind that Kant only denied those motives which are conditional. So he said that if love would be free from inclination, then it converted itself from pathological to practical, and then it could be ordered. Swamiji says, unattached love will not hurt you. Do anything, marry, have children, do anything you like. Nothing will hurt you. Do nothing with the idea of mind. Duty for duty's sake, work for work's sake. What is that to you? You stand aside. Swamiji considered love as an impetus for duty. Thus, he says, duty is seldom sweet. It is only when love greases its wheels and it runs smoothly. It is a continuous friction otherwise. Swamiji boosted the morale and enthusiasm for work of his disciples and followers with the following words of exhortation. Onward, my brave boys, money or no money, men or no men. Have you love? Have you got? Onward and forward to the bridge. You are irresistible. But Swamiji adds the caution that the word love is very difficult to understand. Love never comes until there is freedom. There is no true love possible in the slave. According to him, Karma Yogi should be pure sattvika, or who has eliminated his little self and works with total detachment from the desire for the fruits of action, and his heart must be filled with that amount of love and sympathy which can embrace the entire world. Kant says that all other will may subside, but goodwill will remain ever glorious. It is full unto itself. So, what is goodwill is free will, and actions performed out of goodwill is duty for Kant. Swamiji's words may be recalled in this context. Karma Yoga teaches us that the ordinary idea of duty is on the lower plane. Nevertheless, all of us have to do our duty. Yet, we may see that this peculiar sense of duty is very often a great cause of misery. Duty becomes a disease with us. It drags us ever forward. It catches hold of us and makes our whole life miserable. It is the bane of human life. The duty, this idea of duty, is the midday summer sun which scorches the innermost soul of mankind. Look at the poor slaves to duty. Duty leaves them no time to say prayers, no time to bathe. Duty is ever on them. They go out and work. Duty is ever on them. They come home and think of the work for the next day. Duty is on them. It is living a slave's life, at last dropping down in the street and dying in harness like a horse. This is duty as it is understood. Bhagavad Gita repeatedly exhorts us to work, offering all work and the fruits of all work to God without any personal attachment, for otherwise our work and actions will be cause of bondage. Such a karma yogi will be like Padma Patra Mibambhasa, or lotus like in water, being untouched or wetted by water, though it is in the water. No sin can contaminate the yogi, although he is intensely engaged in action. ब्रह्मण्याधाय कर्माणि संगम त्यक्त्वा करोति यः lipyate nasa papena padma patramibambhasa. Karma yoga based on bhakti or devotion, surrender to God, is the way to freedom, peace, and blessedness. Sri Krishna says, Mai sarvani karmani sannasyad chatma chetasa nirashir nirmamo bhutva yudhyasva vigatajvaraha. Ye me matamidam nityam anutishtanti manavaha shraddhavanto nasuyanto muchyante devi karmavihi. Devoid of the fever of the soul, engage in battle by dedicating all actions to me with mind intent on the self and becoming free from expectations and egoism. Those men who ever follow these teachings of mine with faith and without cavil, they also become freed from actions. The twofold path of work for work's sake and work out of love of God are the same, for both of them have selfless love at the basis. Although Kant talks about duty for duty's sake and considers it as moral, but his exposition seems to be rather incomplete because he did not say what is the impetus for duty. It is not that Kant did not accept love. We already saw that he accepted love which is free from inclination, but he did not consider it as an impetus. We may perhaps say that Kant's theory of duty for duty's sake attains completeness through supplementing it with Swamiji's idea of love as the motivation for karma yoga. Kant imagines a kingdom of ends, which is another name of an ideal society, where every man will impose moral law upon itself, and as the consequence, they live harmoniously with each other. He says that man himself is an end. He is the ideal of his own self. So we all are valuable as the members of the prescribed kingdom. For this, every man should have respect himself as well as others. We must not hate others as well as ourselves. Like Kant, Swamiji also imagined a moral society which he considered as the end of Karma Yoga. He said, as soon as the seeming self has gone, the whole world, which at first appears to us to be filled with evil, will appear to be heaven itself and full of blessedness. Its very atmosphere will be blessed. Every human face there will be good. Such is the end and aim of Karma Yoga, and such is its perfection in practical life. Kant wants to say that freedom of the will is the fundamental postulate of morality. According to Kant, the basic concept of morality is, to quote, morality is thus the relation of actions to the autonomy of the will, that is, to the possible universal legislation through its action. But the critics of Kant's theory of goodwill say that this is merely a formal principle. Hence, it becomes difficult to understand how one can be guided by or derive inspiration from it to move toward higher planes of life by performance of a formal duty. This leads us to what Bradley's criticism of Kant and what he has to say on Kant's concept of duty. Bradley on Kant's conception of duty vis-à-vis Swami Vivekananda's concept of duty. The British philosopher Francis Herbert Bradley writes in his ethical studies that duty for duty's sake is false and impossible. It may not be superfluous to show in addition that even if such a principle of action were possible, yet it would worthless and of no avail for practice. Bradley makes such a strong remark because he feels that it is impossible to move from the form of duty to particular duties. He thinks it is necessary that peculiar duties should be taken for granted in ordinary morality. Bradley feels that Kant's duty for duty's sake is difficult to accept because what duty for duty's sake really does is first to posit a determination such as property, love, courage, etc., and then to say that whatever contradicts there is wrong. And since the principle is a formal empty universal, there is no connection between it and the content which is brought under it. As we have elaborately discussed earlier, Kant regards goodwill as the only good. The goodwill for Kant is the rational will, and that is the practical reason which imposes the moral law upon itself. But Bradley said that what after all remains is the acting for the sake of a good will to realize oneself by realizing the will which is above us and higher than ours, and the assurance that is, and not the self to be pleased. It is end for which we have to live. But as to that which the good will is, it tells us nothing and leaves us with an ideal abstraction. Bradley goes on to add, a will which does not act is no will, and every act is a particular event. An act is this or that act, and an act is general is nonsense. But how can a formal act be this or that act? Even where the abstraction has been specialized into definite material ends and aims to be accomplished. Yet, even there, for the particular volition and the special circumstances of time, place, etc., are wanted. Bradley considers the importance of circumstances because they determine the way in which the overruling duty must be realized. We may wish to compare this idea of Bradley to Swamiji's idea of duty as stated in his own words. Our duties are determined by our desires to a much larger extent than we are willing to grant. In the Bhagavad Gita, Sri Krishna says, the four castes have been created by me through the classification of the gunas and duties, and asserts that this kind of duty according to one's position is one's swadharma. The Lord says, Shreyan swadharmo vigunaha paradharmat swanushchilat swadharme nidhanam shreyaha paradharmo bhayabhaha. One's own duty, though defective, is superior to another's duty well performed. Death is better while engaged in one's own duty, another's duty is fraught in fear. Similarly, Bradley, in talking about the importance of one's station in life, says, to know what a man is, you must not take him in isolation. He is one of a people. He was born in a family. He lives in a certain society in a certain state. What he has to do is depend on what his place is, what his function is, and that all comes from his station, a station in the organism. Swamiji also asserts what duty for one is not duty for another. Each duty has its own place, and according to the circumstances in which we are placed, we must perform our duties. Bradley thinks that man cannot realize himself in himself as moral because by conforming his sensuous nature of the universal, he leads to its entire suppression, and therefore not only himself but also of the morality, which is constituted by the relation of himself to the universal law. Bradley says that man then cannot find self-realization in the morality of pure beauty because he cannot look on his subjective self as the realized moral law. He cannot look on the objective world as the realization of the moral law. He cannot realize the moral law at all because it is definite that as that which has no peculiar content and that therefore no reality, or if he gives it a content, then it is not the law he realizes, since the content is got not from a law but from elsewhere. In short, duty for duty's sake is an unsolved contradiction. Further, Bradley, in thinking about the essence of morality, makes significant observations. The essence of morality was a similar contradiction. Negate the sensuous self, but if the sensuous self is negated, possibility of morality disappears. To be moral, I must will my station and its duties. That is, I will to particularize the moral system truly in a given case. Compare with Swamiji's statement, our duty to do the work which will exalt and ennoble us in accordance with the ideas and activities of the society in which we are born. Hence, the position that we hold in society are the duty and we perform in accordance to it are important. There is reference to the circumstances in one's duty and therefore a formal principle would not be helpful to govern duty of anyone. The purport of performance of duties according to one's station in life is explained by Swamiji. Let everyone do the best he can for realizing his own ideal. Nor it is right that I should be judged by your standard or you by mine. The apple tree should not be judged by the standard of a oak tree, nor the oak by that of the apple. The only way to rise is by doing the duty next to us and thus gathering strength, go on until we reach the highest state. In the concluding remarks of Ethical Studies, Bradley looks upon morality as the process of religion which survives within religion. He considers religion to have its root in society, and if religion be separated from the society, Bradley thinks that it becomes a mere form and therefore ceases. Bradley considers that the ideal moral self is unattainable through morality, yet he suggests that it is attainable in religion. Bradley's famous lines in the concluding remarks of the book Ethical Studies are significant. He said, here where we are landed at last, the process is at an end, though the best activity here first begins. Here our morality is consummated in oneness with God, and everywhere we find that immortal love, which builds itself forever on contradiction, but in which the contradiction is eternally resolved. Compare with Swamiji's words, the only true duty is to be unattached and work as free beings, to give up all work unto God. All our duties are His. Blessed are we that we are ordered out here. Be at rest, be free and work. This kind of freedom is a very hard thing to attain. How easy it is to interpret slavery as duty, the morbid attachment for flesh as duty. What is duty after all? It is really the impulsion of the flesh of our attachment, and when an attachment has been established, we call it duty. Duty is good to the extent that it checks brutality. To the lowest kind of men who cannot have any other ideal, it is of same good. But those who want to be karma yogis must throw the idea of duty overboard. There is no duty for you and me. Whatever you have to give to the world, do by all means, but not as a duty. Do not take any thought of that. Be not compelled. Why should you be compelled? Everything that you do under compulsion goes to build up attachment. Why should you have any duty? There is no duty for you and me. Whatever you have to give to the world, do give by all means, but not as a duty. Swamiji further says, a man can attain to perfection, the highest goal, sitting on the throne, commanding armies, working out big plans for nations. In fact, Krishna's great sermon was preached on the battlefield. When you are doing any work, do not think that anything beyond right performance of duties of any station in life without attachment to result leads us to the highest realization of the perfection of the soul. Let us work on doing as we go whatever happens to be our duty and being ever ready to put our shoulders on the wheel. Then surely shall we see the light. In this paper, we have attempted to discuss Swami Vivekananda's teaching on Karma Yoga based on the traditional ancient Vedic teaching as embodied in the Bhagavad Gita vis-à-vis Immanuel Kant's concept of duty and Francis Herbert Bradley's critical comments on Kant's thesis, wherefrom would emerge a new further insights by an amalgamation of the following mighty streams of thought. 1. The great ancient Vedic teachings of Sri Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita. 2. More modern interpretation by Swami Vivekananda in his teaching on Karma Yoga. 3. Western philosophical perspectives of Kant and Bradley. Bradley's concept of duty for duty's sake and Kant's concept on duty for duty's sake and Bradley's criticism thereof. We believe that the preliminary critical study, perhaps the first of its kind to our knowledge, will open up further researchers to the extremely important ideas of duty for duty's sake, work for work's sake. Karma Yoga is a spiritual discipline leading to the realizing of the supreme reality as emphasized in ancient Indian texts like the Bhagavad Gita, reiterated, reinforced, and reformulated by the relatively modern prophets like Swami Vivekananda. Thank you.